As Russia's full-scale war is entering its third year, Ukraine finds itself in a very uncertain moment. With US aid blocked in Congress and Donald Trump's potential return to the presidential office later this year, many fear that Ukraine will no longer be able to rely on its biggest aid provider by far. Today in Kyiv, we're speaking with Volker, former US Special Representative for Ukraine and former US Ambassador to NATO, about his vision of the future of this war and the West's main miscalculations when it comes to supporting Ukraine. At the press conference, you mentioned that there's still room for maneuver when it comes to Ukraine aid in Congress, but do you think there's actually support for any of those moves in Congress, and do you hear anything that would give you that hope from people in Washington?
Yes, yes, because I've spoken with a number of members of Congress and with senators. The support for Ukraine is very strong on a bipartisan basis. Both the Republicans and the Democrats, about 80% of each party, is strongly supportive of Ukraine. So I have no doubt that the votes are there and that it will get through. The problem is unrelated issue, the southern border, and parliamentary procedure. How do we get it done? That's what people are trying to figure out, and I've spoken with a number who have ideas about how to do this. Just here in Kyiv last week, or earlier this week, was Brian Fitzpatrick, member of Congress from Pennsylvania, co-chair of the Ukraine caucus, and he has a proposal for how to advance this as well. So people are working on this, and I think it will get done. But it is complicated by the southern border and the parliamentary procedures.
I'm sure you've heard there's a lot of anxiety when it comes to Donald Trump's potential election this year and return to the presidential office. What do you think it would mean for Ukraine if he does come back to the Oval Office? And he said multiple times he knows how to end this war. What do you think his strategy would be?
I don't think he knows what his strategy would be, so I certainly don't know. I think that he is posturing for political position. You know, he's running for election, so he wants to say things that make him sound strong and tough and smart. But I don't think he actually has anything specific. The one thing that I would highlight to people is don't make any assumptions. Don't assume that you know what Donald Trump is going to do or what his views will be. Just, you know, everybody should be themselves, look after their own interests, make proposals, engage. Don't make any assumptions. And if you remember, in his first term as president, see if he gets reelected, but when he was president before, he did have a lot of public warmth towards Vladimir Putin. But at the same time, he lifted the arms embargo on Ukraine, he provided Javelin missiles, he shut down the Russian consulate in San Francisco, he was very much opposed to Nord Stream 2. So a lot of the policies were right, even though you had that personal style that people didn't like. So I would say, you know, if you're Ukrainian, you're going to have to work with whatever U.S. government we have, do what you have to do, be engaging, be proactive.
And speaking of working with any U.S. government, so we don't assume, but we prepare. How, based on your personal interactions with Donald Trump and everything you know about his style of management and governance, how should Ukraine work with him so that it gets, you know, the best support possible?
Three things again that I always say: don't make any assumptions about what you think he's going to do. Do your own homework. So whether it's about economy, about reforms, about the military, be ready, be on top of things, do your own homework, be prepared, and make proposals. Take the initiative, be proactive about suggesting, here's what we should do together, here's what we should do together. Just be out there. If you wait and complain, that's going to create a negative dynamic. So you have to be proactive.
And what is your assessment of this recent increased warnings about the potential Russian attack against NATO territory? I know you've mentioned that you think that Russia is kind of playing a game there and trying to create this anxiety in the Western countries, but is there any chance Russia could be seriously considering that?
I think if we talk about it in the sense of hybrid attacks, So cyber attacks, little green men, a little territorial scuffle, not a full-scale invasion of another country where they don't have the resources to do that. But I could see them trying to test, what might NATO do. So we can't ignore that possibility. And while we're on NATO, what do you make of this recent remarks by Trump about encouraging an aggressor state to attack a NATO country that doesn't meet the defense spending quota? And what do you think Europe should make of those? First off, remember what he was saying. He was bragging about what he claims he did in the past. This was not saying this is what he's going to do in the future. He was bragging about how he got NATO countries to spend more on defense. So it was all about getting NATO countries to spend money, and that he succeeded. That's his political macho that he wants to show. Nonetheless, the suggestion that it's okay for Russia to attack any country, especially a NATO ally, it's an outrageous suggestion. And when you look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine, with the killing, the bombing of civilian populations, civilian infrastructure, rape, abduction of children, and so forth, it is horrific, and we should not wish this on anybody. So I think it's a very callous and insensitive and thoughtless thing to say, even in a context of a political campaign. It's the wrong thing to say. And I think Europe, Ukraine, etc., do push back on that. That's not acceptable. But let's work on the future. What do we actually do together? And then again, don't make assumptions about what he's going to do now. Do your homework and be proactive. You mentioned that you were at the Munich Security Conference, and we had our reporter there, making his observations. What we sensed is that Western leaders often talk about Russia's miscalculations, and they love to go back to all the way, 2 years earlier, when there was this successful defense of Kyiv, and Russia's miscalculation of winning it, capturing it in just 3 days. But do you think the West spends enough time analyzing its own miscalculations when it comes to the war? And what do you think is the biggest one that the West has made? Definitely not. We have made a lot of mistakes from just before Russia's invasion and throughout. And the biggest mistake was to hold back on types of military assistance out of fear, because we were afraid of Russian escalation. Huge mistake. We should have understood from the beginning that Putin's intent is to win and defeat Ukraine, and we should be giving Ukraine everything that we can to prevent that. And if Putin loses in Ukraine, we deter future war. If Putin is able to get away with aggression in Ukraine, he will do it again and again and again. So that is the big mistake. Do you also consider it a miscalculation to not be ready to accept Ukraine as a member of NATO at the moment? Yes, I do. I think that's a mistake as well. Every time we fail to give Ukraine a clear pathway to membership, Putin knows that he has deterred us. He has caused us not to do something because we're afraid. And people in the West need to make policy not out of fear, but out of purpose. We need to know what we believe and what we're trying to achieve, not just be afraid. Something you also addressed before is that the West keeps stubbornly saying that it will support Ukraine as long as it takes, but there's no public commitment to support Ukraine to help it actually win this war. So if not Ukraine's victory, what is the West's real objective in this war? That's the question. That's exactly the question. What do you mean when you say, as long as it takes? As long as what takes? What are you trying to accomplish? And you never get an answer to that. We need to change that. We need to say, we are here for Ukraine's victory and the defeat of Russian forces in Ukraine. We're not talking about defeating Russia. No one's invading Russia. No one's trying to take Russian territory. But Russia has to be defeated in Ukraine. We cannot allow this aggression to succeed. Thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you, Mr. Volker.